Anyways, moving on. Today I want to focus the majority of this on kind of a topic I've been avoiding like the plague for a while, but I decided it's probably time to break my silence and talk about it. I want to talk about Trump, John Eastman, some new revelations involving January 6th, all that fun. My old professor from Chapman, John Eastman, is quite a character. I'm starting to question if he was even a good lawyer in the first place. I know he was the chair of Chapman's law school, but I don't know. I mean, all you have to do is type in his speech on January 6th before the riots started. The guy just looks like a goofball. I know looks can be deceiving, but I'll go into more detail because it's just all insane. But I also did just want to say that Trump reaching out to Putin a few days ago in that video and asking to investigate the Bidens and saying, I know you loathe this country right now, so would you do us a favor and investigate Biden? I thought that was just despicable. It's really treacherous in a sense because it's showing that he's fine with a country that is literally bombing the shit out of Ukraine right now. He's okay with, I guess, giving Putin some sort of comfort and reaching out to him to help his own stupid interests. It's just really dangerous to me to have someone who was that close to our nuclear codes and had that much power in the United States who is again reaching out to Putin because he doesn't like Biden and he still believes the election was stolen. Disgusting. But anyways, to start, a federal judge has voiced some interesting thoughts about January 6th. So the judge said a few days ago that John Eastman and Donald Trump basically launched, in quotes, a coup in search of a legal theory, which I think is a genius way to put it. A coup in search of a legal theory. Axios reports here that a federal judge on Monday ordered John Eastman, who's an attorney and ally of former President Trump, to turn over a cache of documents to the House Select Committee investigating the insurrection. In quotes, the judge was a guy named David Carter, and he wrote that Eastman and Trump launched a campaign to overturn a Democratic election, an action unprecedented in American history. And I guess this is kind of mainly stemmed from the January 6th committee wanting to, dive deeper into the records of what happened that day and try to prove that Trump and his allies engaged in criminal conspiracies to defraud the United States. I mean, people like myself have already thought this for a long time, but I guess it's good that it's on the record and we're really getting more information out about it. Of course, our pal John Eastman here has, tried as much as he can to not be helpful. That Axios article reads that, in quotes, Eastman, who helped Trump during the final weeks of his presidency to develop a strategy to pressure former VP Mike Pence into overturning the results of the election, refused to turn over documents to the Select Committee, claiming that they were protected by attorney-client privilege, end quotes. But I don't know. I honestly do not see that holding up. And Judge Carter has said that only 10 documents were actually privileged. The rest were not. So the rest are going to come out one way or another, I'm assuming. I'm also starting to wonder if this guy is just a shitty attorney, like I kind of alluded to earlier, because his theories and arguments are just getting more and more nutty. It's never good when you want to do something illegal and then you try to backtrack to find a theory to go with it. You would think he would know better. Trump once said, I think it was about Mexico, that they weren't bringing over their best or brightest people, something like that. And I kind of wonder if maybe this more applies to Trump. Anyways, Carter, the judge, also wrote that based on the evidence, the court finds it more likely than not that President Trump corruptly attempted to obstruct the joint session of Congress on January 6th. And I guess the reason why I think it's important that a federal judge is actually stating now that Trump is involved and may have broken the law, it's just because a lot of judges want to stay away from this. They want to avoid this like the plague, right? Because it's just unprecedented to prosecute a former president or a sitting president. But the fact that these judges are starting to speak up, I think, is showing a change in rhetoric and in ideology towards how to deal with this. I also think maybe it'll pressure the Justice Department to do more. It'll pressure Merrick Garland to do more. I've been somewhat disappointed in the Justice Department not really going further with what happened, but they are trying to hold this fine balance, and we might be seeing that balance is starting to break. It's interesting stuff, honestly. And moving on, there is something else interesting going on involving Trump and January 6th. Apparently, This is always fun, but not surprising. Trump has withheld a significant amount of phone records that conveniently were all around the time the Capitol was being stormed. I think it's like 7 hours of footage. There's almost a weird sense of Watergate to this part, the covering up of recordings, phone records, etc. But anyways, Vox from today, Friday, writes that, in quotes, the House committee investigating the January 6th attack seemed to be building toward a conclusion that Donald Trump broke the law, and developments in recent days have intensified questions about his potential criminal exposure. Also, the Washington Post reported that White House records, in quotes, of Trump's calls on the day of the attack, which have been turned over to the January 6th committee, had a gap of about 7 hours and 37 minutes in which no calls were listed. The article goes on to talk about how Trump used potentially burner phones that day as well to avoid this record of phone calls that could have maybe hurt him. We know Jim Jordan was on the phone with him a lot. We know there's been calls, from Fox News people like Hannity telling him to stop. But I'm curious what was in this 7 hours, right? Trump has also, of course, claimed that he doesn't know what burner phones are. And I don't think Trump's the brightest guy, but I think he knows what burner phones are. He seems like a burner phone type of guy. Not to stereotype or judge, but he just seems like a burner phone type of guy to me. Also, John Bolton was reported to have said that Trump used the term burner phones a lot, which sounds more accurate to me, just based on kind of what we know about this guy. Also, there's been a civil suit, I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago, in which a judge wrote, in quotes, Trump is more likely than not to have committed both obstruction and conspiracy, as he tried to impede Congress's count of the electoral votes. So I alluded to this earlier, but I think it's just worth mentioning again that we are seeing kind of this cascade effect of judges just implying that Trump should be prosecuted, or I don't want to go that far, more just that he committed something illegal. And it's new. But, like I said, Trump is different. Like, usually you don't need to prosecute a former president, right? But Trump's changed the rules. Definitely changed the rules. And I think if one judge were to actually do it, more would follow. But I'll go into later why I don't know if that's actually the best move, as popular as it may seem. I also think, in a sense, they really should try, I guess the argument for why they should impeach him, not impeach him, sorry, they've tried that, why they should prosecute him is because maybe it would stop him from running for president, because I'm sure parts of him wants to run again just to be insulated from these prosecutions. So I think there's definitely part of that. Unfortunately, though, we have to remember that the January 6th committee, the select committee, cannot indict Trump. They can only recommend that someone else does it. A lot like the Mueller probe, all these other ones, is like Congress is in kind of a weird step here where, yeah, they investigate, but they don't actually have the ability to do much with that. And that's the problem to me, is because information is arbitrary these days. People believe different things. We live in echo chambers. Damning facts to some may be meaningless to others. And so I think it's really tough to have a committee that can recommend things, because recommendations are not particularly powerful these days. Also, side note, I apologize if it's kind of loud out in the background. It's a busy Friday out there. I've tried to move to different places to get the sound down, but it's not really working. But anyways, the Vox article makes a good point on the fact that Congress cannot indict. It says, in quotes here, like Judge Carter, the one I talked about earlier, the committee can only offer their own opinion. The people who will make the call on whether to charge Trump are the prosecutors and leadership of the U.S. Justice Department. And it's not all that clear whether they are sufficiently persuaded by these arguments to make that enormously consequential, sure to be controversial action. End quotes. And kind of what I've taken away is that while the Justice Department has charged, the more than 700 people who actually were involved with storming the Capitol, roughing up police, breaking the law, it was tangible. There was proof they did it. It was easy to arrest them and charge them, right? Unfortunately, there's no direct evidence right now that Trump foresaw the mob breaking into the Capitol, right? Obviously, he wanted to do everything possible to stop the election results. He lied, he gaslighted, but there's just no direct proof that he was involved in January 6th's violence. Now, to me, that is irritating, because I think maybe looking at charging Trump for January 6th is wrong or not the right angle to take. Maybe charging him for conspiracy and obstruction could be better, because I guess just in reality, January 6th was just the outcome of a series of events and unethical decisions that Trump was guilty of being a part of. And that's just where it gets kind of difficult, because I don't really... Now, okay, well, maybe that 7 hours of phone records that just are not there, maybe that's where we actually could know what Trump actually did, because I'll get into it in a second. Like, I'm not particularly for prosecuting him, and I'll explain in a second, but now if we hear phone calls where he's just blatantly trying to egg January 6th on, I feel like you would kind of have to. Or at least put that on the record, but right now we can't do either. Now, I think that, like I've said, Trump is technically guilty and should be prosecuted, but that's not how it works. And I actually seem to agree with Bill Galston, who is one of my favorite political scientists. He's a former Republican as well, and writes for the Brookings Institute. And he basically makes the case that he is not sure if prosecuting Trump will do anything or really alleviate the larger issues here. He discusses how it may just make Trump a martyr, make him less likely to fade away. It also may empower him and may just fire up the base. He astutely puts it that Trump is a political problem, and I agree with that. As much as we want to treat him like a legal problem, we have a political problem on our hands. He also astutely points out that since Trump is more of a political issue, the problem must be solved with political means. I assume this means he needs to lose again, never be voted back into office, and we just need almost his support to fade over time, not try to prosecute him, because that could just make things more volatile. There's a great article also in Justia called Prosecuting Trump May Be Right, but Unwise, and it's by Austin Surratt, and it's from back in December of 2021, but I think it's aged pretty well. That's why I wanted to mention it. And it gives the pros and cons of prosecuting Trump, and a lot of them are ones I've already mentioned, and the article brings up the obvious reason for prosecuting Trump. It quotes the New York Magazine here, saying in quotes, elite political impunity would continue unabated, and the Justice Department's failure would incentivize even more high-level government misconduct in the future. And that is a serious issue, and I understand why you don't want someone like Trump to get away with setting this dangerous precedent. I completely get that. But the other side of the argument that Justia brings up is also interesting. It says here in quotes, going forward with even a well-grounded prosecution of Trump would almost certainly turn him into a martyr, fuel a furious attack on the Biden Justice Department for using prosecution as a political weapon, spur violent outbursts, and plunge this country even closer to the abyss, which it seems to be fast approaching. An investigation and potential indictment and trial of Mr. Trump, according to Eric Posner, would give the circus of the Trumpian presidency a central place in American politics for the next several years, sucking the air out of the Biden administration and feeding into Mr. Trump's politically potent claims to martyrdom. Mr. Trump will portray the prosecution as revenge by the deep state and corrupt Democrats. End quotes. And I think that's spot on. I think that sums up exactly what would probably happen. And that's the sucky thing about the reality that we live in right now, is sometimes the right thing isn't the best thing to do or the correct thing to do. And that just shows the country's moral compass is just spinning out of control right now. The one thing I will say is that if we don't prosecute Trump and we know his base still likes him, then what do we do? And honestly, there's no fine answer there, but I think we need a record for history to judge him. Like, that is honestly, it's so milquetoast, I know. It's not like a great answer, but I really do think a record for history to judge is at least the minimum we can do. And I think that's why the January 6th committee is so important. And I think they just need to keep going. And that's why it worries me that if the midterms go really well for Republicans, they could try to dissolve it.